now happy to welcome Larry Abdullah, who's going to talk to us about ancient Florida Native Americans. Come on up.
Hi, good morning. My name's Larry Abdullah. I've been studying this topic for a while, and we've had another speaker on this topic. We have been here in this North America, South America, not really, barely 800 years. Yet these people going back 12,000 years, and it is spiritual to remember their history. So there are multiple theories on how Native Americans first came to America. The prevalent theory is that they crossed the Bering Strait starting about 15,000 years ago. The Earth warms and cools in cycles of around 100,000 years due to minor changes of the Earth's orbit and the tilt of the axis. The period after 15,000 years ago marks the end of a great ice age when glaciers in Alaska and Canada blocked entry for travelers on foot to reach the New World. They were over a mile high. Travelers after the melting began, after the end of the Ice Age, travelers could now walk across the Bering Straits and down the coast to enter what is now Canada, the United States, Central and South America. Their campsites and burial sites along the way have been verified. Included in this are the study of arrowheads, some of which have called Clovis, based on a discovery of arrowheads in the bodies of large mammals, arrow points, honed from hard minerals, indicate the presence of Native Americans. It is interesting to remember that during the first several millennia of Native arrival, giant mammals populated our continents. Mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed tigers. Skeletons of them can be seen at our museums like the Brevard Museum in Cocoa on the Eastern Florida campus in Cocoa, which is also where I worked. On the campus, natives hunted all these beasts, even mammoths. We think we are smart, but think what it would be like to take down essentially a great woolly 14-foot elephant with only spears and arrows. It took ingenuity and teamwork. And they were here in Florida. Now we must consider that some natives arrived here even before the end of the last ice age. A few older sites have been found. In archaeology, that's a big controversy, 20,000 even years ago. And, you know, there are various theories. My theory is that they came south in large canoes you can build a canoe that will take 6, 8 people, and came close to shore and camped out along the shore. They came in for water and game to build fires into the coves, and then they went out to sea. Some of these campsites have been found. The various Polynesian islands up to Hawaii were settled around 3000 and 1000 BC, in the case of Hawaii, by travelers from Asia using catamarans. The exact dates and methods of travel will continue to be a controversial topic, but they navigated by the stars. They built their own catamarans, but the canoe, like the canoe that holds 6, 8 people, is something that natives have used. We're able to go back and forth to Cuba or to the Bahamas Here now we must consider, the oldest Native American fossil find in Florida is dated around 12,500 years BC. A stone knife, mastodon bones, and fossilized dung found in underwater sinkhole near Tallahassee show that humans lived in Florida 14,500 years ago. This is part of work in underwater archaeology that is necessary to discover ancient secrets. Another site in Vero Beach found skeletons in the same grave as mastodons, both around 13,000 years ago. These were found in the Ochilla River Basin in North Florida. So this presentation deserves a PowerPoint. I don't yet have one, but I have here a picture of some. There are many pictures. The Florida of the Paleo-Indians would not be recognizable to you. Lower sea levels meant that the coasts were much farther than they are today, up to 50 miles. So just imagine, especially along the Gulf of Mexico. As a result, Florida's land area was about twice what it is today. Modern Pinellas Peninsula, where St. Peter is situated some 15 miles from the Paleo-Indian shore. So you can see why all over the world archaeology has to become underwater archaeology, because so much was lost. If you're going beyond 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Lower sea levels and massive glaciers create a climate that was much drier. Ground levels in the interior of the state were greatly below what they are today. Florida was cool and arid, with springs, lakes, and rivers and other wetlands so important to prevent, in the present, were not the same. More arid conditions meant that a different array of animals and plants were present. Some of these animals, like mammoths here in Florida, Pleistocene horses, and now in the now extinct species of bison, had prospered during the Ice Age, but would disappear as the climate warmed and they fell prey also to human hunters. Typical vegetation included plants that could live in the dry coastline. Scrub oaks, pine forests, and savannas were most common. In the restricted localities where water was present, plants better suited to wetter conditions were found. But what you can find now is anywhere where you see a nice piece of property, a river coming into the sea, O'Galley River, you can bet that Native Americans also found those properties attractive, and often will find fossils. The same oases that provide humans with water were also used by animals. Consequently, not only were watering holes places where people camped, they were sites where animals were ambushed, butchered, and eaten, and their remains discarded along with other debris by the Paleo-Indians. Today, these camps are in river bottoms and sinkholes. Over 2.5 millennia, there must have been thousands of such camps and kill sites. It is no wonder that Paleo-Indian aged tools and butchered animals' bones are found in those rivers and sinkholes. As the present time, the largest of these underwater Paleo-Indian projects is the Ochilla River Prehistory Project. The Ochilla River Prehistory Project has located nearly 40 inundated sites for underwater archaeology. So we're still learning, and the same springs that I've dived in or you might visit are some of these places. Where the Spanish first arrived in Florida, there were several settled communities of natives that were more gatherers than hunters. They did not have to rely on hunting large mammals to survive and had only small gardens. Fish, mussels, oysters, and small game were abundant on our coasts. Some of these tribes were and you can just imagine that, there were so many fish in the river that you didn't have to put your net out for long. fish. Some of these tribes were the Calusa in southwest Florida, the Arawat and Carib in the Caribbean, the Tamunkan in north central Florida, the AIS here in the Space Coast, the Appalachee in northwest Florida, the Tequesta in the Miami area, and the Mayaka of the central St. Johns River. One of the most developed tribes was the Calusa, who dug canals, built small islands, and ceremonial centers. Tribes were often described by the Spanish, who left in frustration, believing that the fight was worth the difficulty to cultivate land and the lack of gold. So they wanted gold, and the land was just too forested for them to really cultivate. Tribes tended to live near springs, rivers, and coasts, and perhaps migrated between them. Springs in Florida, like the Crystal River, Wakiva Springs, Isnataki, often had fossils and mounds associated with them. Mounds all over Florida are evidence of these pre-Columbian tribes. The Crystal River State Archaeological Site contains 6 burial mounds dating back 2,000 years. I have a book up front, which is just Indian mounds in Florida, and they're showing Indian mounds all over Florida, including some near here. In Brevard County, we have one of the most important native burial sites in Florida and this nation. It is called Windover, for the developer that found it in Titusville. Buried in shallow pond graves, over 100 skeletons were found dating 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. These skeletons have been extensively studied by the Archaeology Department at Florida State. They are well preserved with portions of brain and other tissue. Few of them have experienced physical trauma, indicating that warfare was not common in the Paleolithic times. Indications of medical care, like setting of bones, was found in the forensic analysis. From stomach contents of curative berries and other indications, it seems that care was provided to the tribe by medicine shamans or women using curative herbs and berries. A variety of tools were found in grave sites made of wood, bone, and flint. These artifacts indicated butchering tools, needles, spears, and hooks. Some tools were likely used to make tools out of softer material. The Windover people were said to be pre-pottery. Now, what does that mean? Indications are that they used gourds or wood bowls wood vessels for bowls. Pottery in Florida was invented about 5,000 years ago. After its invention, the technology was spread throughout the state as new methods and styles were developed. The Windover people were found to be skilled in the development of textiles. Cloth was used to enshroud the bushes in the pond. Perhaps by necessity, the information I have read from the archaeologists at Windover is rich in physical anthropology, but lacking in cultural anthropology. As is often the case, we have to infer or imagine what life was like for these Paleo Indians. So I have a book on Windover also up front, and I had met one of the Windover archaeologists, but he was sick and unable to come here. DNA analysis of the Windover people has been inconclusive, like other Native American populations Their DNA show Asian origin. They have not, however, been able to associate this DNA with any existing known tribe. That is not surprising, since other local ancient tribes found in Brevard or nearby counties are AIS and Tamunkin. So if you imagine where we are now, it was AIS. Tamunkin is just north of us, north and west. The Calusa were south of us on the west coast, and Mayaka in Miami. But we don't really have very good DNA for any of the ancient, really ancient tribes. Windover is some of the best samples. The AS lived here, and their mounds were discovered in Cape Canaveral and along our river shores, down as far as Fort Pierce, and the Tamunkin lived just north of Brevard and inland along the shores of the St. Johns River. The Calusa were powerful in the southwest region. Northwest Florida had settlements of both Appalachee and Tamunkin Indians. It is worth regressing to history. The Spanish were looking mainly for gold and also for places to live, converts and slaves. They found Florida to be inhospitable. Hot, mosquito-ridden, and devoid of gold, they built St. Augustine, including the Castillo de San Marcos, near their favorite harbor of St. Augustine. The St. Marcos fort is built of the same coquina stones that we find on our beaches. Word went out to all the tribes in Florida to bring coquina to St. Augustine. The walls of St. Marcos are 10 feet thick. British cannonballs were stuck in there as if in mud, unable to shatter these walls. They're still there. Besides St. Marcos, there are only a few Spanish structures found in Florida, which are mostly rudimentary lighthouses. Only about a century after the Spanish arrival, the majority of the ancient Indians in Florida died of foreign diseases spread by the travelers. It was not warfare that killed them. And I will say there's little evidence of the Florida Indians fighting amongst each other, because there was so much plentiful food here and territory, little reason to fight. The Seminole were Creek and Mississauga migrants from Georgia and other Southwest locations. When they arrived here around 1700, ancient Florida natives were almost gone, but there is some indication some of the ancient Florida tribes could have joined them. They settled along the East Coast and Everglades. Most, but not all, natives east of the Mississippi were relocated by the Indian Removal Act of 1830. People have heard of the Trail of Tears. Enforced by future President Andrew Jackson, this act violated all existing treaties and caused great suffering for many tribes. For the Cherokee in North Carolina, it was called the Trail of Tears. In Florida, General Jackson succeeded, but had trouble when natives hid in the Everglades. His horses, men, and also cannons did not want to go there. He tried, but failed. The Seminole in Florida of today are ancestors of these survivors. And I'll add that the Cherokee in North Carolina are also descendants of survivors of their tribe that hid out in the caves and generally just did not or could not find them in the caves. They were relocated mostly to Oklahoma. Similarly, many of them, although, came back. Once things were a little better, they came back to Cherokee, and they came back to Florida. And in Florida, we have a lot of Native Americans around Fort Lauderdale, but we also have a very big Native American community on the West Everglades. So there are 105 skeletons in the vaults of Florida State awaiting further analysis, but not surprisingly, existing natives consider this to be sacrilegious and excessive. The Department of Interior and recent presidents have issued an executive order for the protection of native sacred sites. There is virtually no sign of ancient Indians in Florida or the Caribbean. With no adequate comparison, Wendover people have not been identified yet as AIS. Even if they were, there are no living AIS alive to take authority for the burial site. The act gives authority to the nearest tribe, which in this case is the Seminole. There is a lawsuit in place for the Seminole to receive and intern these remains. A plan exists to recreate a sacred site, perhaps on NASA environmental land. They planned to re-enter most of these remains into such a site. The original Wendover site is set aside as a sacred ground. You can't go to Wendover. The actual burial site is north of Titusville. I've never been there, and they just didn't want a lot of people coming in, I guess. And but the place to learn about Wendover is the Brevard Museum of Natural History just west of Eastern Florida campus in Cocoa. And that's where I learned and was inspired about them. In addition, at that site, there are bones of giant sloths, saber-toothed tigers, and mastodons, as I have said. Ancient Americans have lived here in excess of 10,000 years, and we do little to honor them. Thank you.